Okay, this week we're going to do a project that looks at some standard symbols for ground plans, which we'll be working on starting next week, and also it looks at some of the standard line thicknesses and line types that are used in all drawings. It continues our use of the basic tools and should hopefully reinforce also the ideas that we learned last week about layers, sheet layers, and viewports. So what we're going to do is recreate this drawing, CAD Project 2. You will find a PDF of this drawing in the assignments page for this week's assignment, Project 2 in web courses. So the first thing I'm going to do is open up Vectorworks, and I want to create a new drawing, and I want to use the stationery that I created last week, or that you created last week. So we're going to use the default stationery and click OK. In looking at this file, you'll notice that it is laid out on an 11 by 17 piece of paper, which is the same thing that we did at the end of last week's project. So rather than waiting to get to the final layout, I'm going to go ahead and set my page this week to correspond to the final size of the drawing. So I'm going to go to File, Page Setup, and Printer Setup, any printer, and select Tabloid 11 by 17 and put it in horizontal or landscape mode. Click OK, make sure that these say 10.5 and 16.5, and okay, and there we have our 11 by 17 page. You don't always have to draw in the final size that your drawing is going to be, but in this particular case, since we know what the final layout wants to look like, there's no reason not to go ahead and just sort of work from the beginning in a page that's going to be the same size as where our final will be. So I'm going to check and make sure I'm in half-inch scale. You should be, because we set our stationery up in half-inch scale, but if for some reason you're not, click on the ruler and select half-inch scale. If your ruler is not there, make sure to here in the view bar, click on the flyout and select layer scale and make sure that it's active. The next thing I'm going to do, oh, I didn't mean to do that. I meant to do that. The next thing I'm going to do is set my grid to a size that's going to be helpful for me to lay out all of the items in this drawing. So I'm going to double click on the snapping palette, which will bring up this dialog box, the Smart Cursor settings, and I want to set my reference grid, which is the blue squares that show, to 6 inches, and I'm going to set my snap grid, which is the points that I can actually snap to using my cursor, to 3 inches, because I don't think we're creating anything that's smaller than 3 inches, so there's no reason to have a snap grid that's smaller than that. You could always go back and change this at any time by double clicking on snapping. You'll notice that my grid has disappeared. That's because I just made it smaller than it was before. If I start to zoom in, it will eventually come back and get bigger as I zoom in, but we reach a point where we're zooming out, and that was the point right there where it's too small to draw, so it just disappears entirely. Before I move on, I'm going to save my file. Verts Project 2A, because I already did this earlier today, so I don't want to write over my previous Project 2 file. Alright, so we've got our 11 by 17 page, we are in half-inch scale, we've set our reference grid to 6-inch squares and our snap grid to 3-inch squares. So let's look back over at what we're going to be drawing. So the first thing we're going to do is draw these 7 lines that are representative of the common types of lines that you'll be using in drawings. The first 3 represent line thicknesses. Actually, the first 3 represent line thicknesses. The first 4 represent line thicknesses plus a line type. The standard line size, line thickness that we'll be using is the medium line, which is 0.25. Everything will be a medium line unless specified otherwise. So 75% of the stuff you'll be drawing will be a medium line. In addition to the medium line, we have the thick line, which is twice as thick as the medium line, and the thin line. These 2 lines will be used fairly frequently to denote other things. Then we have the extra thick line, which will be used very infrequently. The extra thick line will basically only be used for drawing borders and title blocks and things, and occasionally something else. But for the most part, you'll be drawing with medium lines, thick lines, and thin lines. You can set up a CAD program to draw 100 different line thicknesses if you want, but generally speaking, we sort of found that the 3 lines are really all you need. Back when people were hand drafting with pencils, you could reasonably be expected to create 3 different line types with a pencil: a regular line, a medium line, a thick line, and a thin line. Anything any more than that you could do, but it sort of took extraordinary skill. And so drafting sort of evolved over the years to use 3 different line thicknesses. Then we also have different line types. We have dashed lines, and specific types of dashed lines, and then some symbols. So what we want to do first is draw these 7 lines. These 7 lines are in half-inch scale, are 4 feet long, and are 12 inches apart. So I'm going to come back to my drawing here. I'm going to draw the first line, 4 feet long. So I'm going to double click on my line tool, and I'm going to type in 4 feet. It already said 4 feet because I just did this, but not 48. Yeah, 4 feet. 48 inches. You can type in 48 inches. You can type in 4 feet. Either way. And then here on the insertion point, I want to click the left-hand side, the left point, the left end of the line for how it's going to insert into the document. I'm going to click OK, and I'll get my crosshair cursor. Then I'm going to place my crosshair right here on a foot over and a foot down, or 6 inches, and we've got 6-inch squares here. So right there, I'm going to insert my line. And you'll notice because I have snapping turned on, it goes right to the intersection of those 2 lines. So now I need to duplicate this line, and I need to do 6 more of them that are exactly like this one. There are a couple different ways that I can do that. The first way is I can just do it again. The numbers are already typed in here, so I don't have to change anything. So I just double click on the line and click OK, and then I'm going to click right there because I said we wanted them to be a foot apart. These are 6-inch squares, so there it is. So I can do that 6 more times. That's an acceptable way of doing it. The other way is by duplicating the line. So I can select the line, edit, duplicate, and it will duplicate the line. I hardly ever use edit duplicate, so I'm going to do Command D, hold down the Command key on the Mac, and then hit D, which will do the same thing as edit. Edit duplicate. Then what I'm going to do is grab the line with the cross cursor. You'll notice how when I move close to the line, it changes to a cross. If I move too close to the line, it changes to the double-ended cursor, and this doesn't move the line. This stretches the line. Don't want that. I want select the line. I want the cross cursor, and I'm going to move it down like that. Alright, so I'm going to do that again. I'm going to duplicate the line. I'm going to hover over it until I get the crossed cursor. I'm going to click, and then I'm going to drag it down and put it right there, which is 12 inches down, or 2 6-inch squares. Then, while it's still selected, I can do this neat little trick. I can hit Command D again, and not only will it duplicate it, but it will remember what I did with it after I duplicated it last time, and it will replicate that command. So I can simply do Command D, that's 4, 5, 6, 7, 6 times, and that will quickly duplicate the line and also replicate the movement. You're going to be using this a lot in drawings, this duplicate idea, so I'm going to do this again just to make sure you get it. So select the line, Command D to duplicate, grab the line with the cursor, the crossed cursor, move it to wherever you want it, which in this case is 12 inches down, or 2 squares, and then Command D again, and then just continue, Command D again, one more time, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So that's probably the easiest way to do that. For those of you who already are pretty familiar with CAD, there is one other way, and I'll show you this. You can use the duplicate array command. So you select the line, edit, duplicate array, tell it that you want a linear array, however many copies you want. I want 6 copies, and then I want them to, when it copies it, to minus 12 inches for each copy. There are a bunch of different, you can do circular arrays, you can do rectangular arrays, you can move it X and Y at the same time. This is a pretty powerful command, but all I want to do is make 6 more copies, and each copy I want to move down 12 inches, and then I'm going to click OK, and it's just going to duplicate that array. So for those of you who, like I said, already have drafting experience with AutoCAD or whatever, you're probably used to the duplicate array command. So there it is. Okay, so now I've created my my 7 lines. I'm going to save. I'm going to go back and look at the line thicknesses. So they're all different. The first 3 are different thicknesses, and then the rest are the same. So the first one is 1.0, and then 0.5, 0.25, and the rest are 0.10. So I'm going to select this one and change it to 1.0, right? And then the next one is 0.5. The next one is 2.5, and it should already be 2.5. Remember, this is our medium line, our standard line, and we set, when we did our stationary last week, our standard default line to be 0.25, so it should already be 0.25. If it's not, just select it and change it. And then the last 4 are going to be, so I'm going to select all 4 of them by dragging over them, and they are going to be 0.10. All right, so far so good. Next thing we're going to do is look at line types. The thin line is not always drawn as a dashed line, but just to save space, instead of putting a thin line and then a thin dashed line, I've just got one thin line that also happens to be dashed. But so the thin line is going to be dashed. The plaster line is going to be dashed. These are shown in this particular drawing. This is a couple years old, as 2 separate types of dashes. We're not going to worry about that today. You can create your own types of dashed lines, but it's a somewhat advanced topic, which if you're interested, I'll be happy to talk to you about. But for the purposes of what we're doing today, we're just going to use this same dash. And then the center line is a special long dash, short dash line. So the first thing we're going to work on is the thin line, which is just a regular dashed line. So we're going to select this line, and to make it a dashed line instead of solid, we're going to do line type. And then the line type is going to be ISO, International Standards Organization, maybe I have to look that up. Any rate, ISO-02 dashed was probably the default. I'm not sure that we set that last week, but that's the way the program defaults. If this isn't your first selection here, if you look down in the list, sort of somewhere in the middle, all the ISOs will be in numerical order. 2 is not here because it's here. As soon as you use any of the types of line types in the document, they go up to the top to the frequently used line type section. So we want the ISO 2. We also want for this one, the plaster line, should also be the same dash. So I'm going to make that line type, and it's just going to default to ISO 2 because it's the only one that's currently in the document right now. So this one, the last one, which is the plaster line, is as I said before, a special long dash, short dash. So we're going to set this to line type, and now we have to click here and find long dash, short dash, which is, where is it? ISO 8. So long dash, short dash. And then the dimension line is has hash marks on the end of it. And this is control, and you don't normally have to do this. Normally when you're drawing dimensions, the dimensions draw their own lines. I just want to remind you of how you can add line markers to the end of lines. So you select the line, and then down here, these buttons turn on the line markers or turn them off, depending on whether they're on or off already. And then beside that, you can click the flyout and choose the type of line marker. In this particular case, we want the hash mark, so we're going to click those and turn those on. All right, so those are our line types. So now we've got our line thicknesses, we've got our line types, and the last thing we want to do is add these symbols for center line and plaster line. These are just text. There is no special symbol to do this. You have to create this yourself. So the symbol that we're all used to seeing for center line is a nested C and an L, so we're just going to have to create that. So I'm going to use the text tool. I'm going to click pretty much anywhere, Whoa, imaginary zoom. Okay, there we go. I'm going to type a C, then I'm going to click somewhere else, and I'm going to type an L. They should both be capitalized. I'm going to select them both, and the size of them, text size, probably 24. That seems a little big for what we're doing right now, so let's try 18. Okay, that seems good. Then what I want to do is I need to, the symbol has the C and the L nested, like I said, so I'm going to move the L up here. And I'm having a hard time doing it, putting it where I want it, because I have snapping turned on, and it's not letting me put it in the middle. It's snapping it, and once, oh gosh, look at that. And that was a total fluke that it let me do that. Normally I would have to turn snapping off so that I could place it where I wanted it. I need to move it up a little bit, and in order to do that, I'm going to use the nudge feature, which is if you hold down the Shift key and then use the arrow keys on the keyboard, the up arrow moves it up, the left arrow moves it left, etc. So I'm going to set it up so that it looks like this, and then I'm going to group them together, Command G, or modify group. And then what I need to do is turn it left so that I can put it on top of the center line the way it's supposed to be. So I'm going to drag it down here, and then I'm going to use the modify rotate command, and I'm going to rotate left, and then put it right there on top of. And I'm going to nudge a little bit so that the L is right on the line, which is the way we generally set up the center line. So there's the center line, and the next thing I'm going to do is the plaster line, which is very similar to the center line, except it's a PL. I'm assuming everyone knows what the center line and the plaster line are. Of course, the center line denotes the center of the stage, and the plaster line is the upstage edge of the proscenium in a proscenium space. So, and we'll talk about that, all this stuff when we get to ground plans. But so now I need to make a P and an L. So I'm going to do the same thing I did with the plaster. With the center line. I'm going to type a capital P and a capital L. I'm going to make them slightly larger. So let's make them 12 point. I'm going to move the L over. I'm going to do a little nudging like that. Okay. Then I'm going to group them together, and I'm going to place it right there on top of the plaster line, the dash line. And then I'm going to go ahead and group the center line and its line together, and I'm going to group the plaster line symbol and its line together, Command G. And there we have all of the lines. And then I'm going to, of course, save. Next up, we will work on the section interiors and the section interior and alternate section interior. What this means is that simply when you're drawing something, for instance a flat, what the inside of that object looks like. This is called the interior of the section. Traditionally, in hand drafting, when you would draw something that was solid, you would draw it with a hatch. It's becoming more and more common with computer drafting to replace the hatch with just a solid gray fill. We actually are going to draw a combination gray fill hatch in our drawing that's slightly different with this white one. That's the hatch we created last week. Either one of these is acceptable. They're both mean the same thing, so we're just going to go ahead and draw both of them just to sort of give you an example of what they should look like. So these two rectangles are 2 feet wide and 1 foot tall. So we're going to go back to our drawing, and we're going to draw we're going to double click on the rectangle tool, and we're going to do 24 inches wide and 12 inches tall. We're going to insert by the upper left hand corner. I'm going to pop down here right there. Actually going to turn snapping back on just to make sure that it did in fact go where it was supposed to. And then I'm going to duplicate that, Command D, and move it so that they're right on top of each other. These both have 0.5 outlines, just for the purposes of our drawing. And like I said, a hatch in the top one and a 50% gray in the bottom one. So we're going to select these both. We're going to do 0.5 line thickness. In the top one, we're going to select hatch. And the theater hatch should automatically pop up. It's one of the two hatches that you made last week. It doesn't really matter which one. You can pick one or two. And then the bottom is going to be solid and 50% gray. So that is our two section interiors. And like I said, the gray, in the example, it's white, and this drawing is a couple years old. Recently, we've decided, by we, I meaning that's was the UCF, it's not like an international standard or anything, that the hatched gray is easier to read. It's easier to understand what's going on than the solid gray is. So that's the only difference. But those are our section interiors. Next, we're going to look at platforms, ramps, and stairs. I'm going to start talking about stairs first because I think it's probably the most intuitive. Hopefully it's obvious that the symbol for stairs is derived from just looking at the stairs from the top, and each one of the rectangles represents a step. So this is the first step, this is the second step, so that's where the symbol for stairs comes from. And then the circles with the numbers indicate the height of the step. So we generally assume that 0 is the stage floor, and that anything going up from the stage floor is plus. So this is a 6-inch step plus 6 inches, and then plus 6 more inches. Anything going down, for instance, if you had a trap door in the stage and stairs going down into the basement, would be minus. So it's generally plus, but that's what the circles mean. The platforms and the ramps are slightly less intuitive. So these are 4x8 platforms. I'm assuming you're all familiar with those. We built them in the shop. So the thing that's sort of not expected here are the crosses, or the cross in the platform, and the 1 slash and the ramp. The plus 48 should be sort of intuitive. That's the height of the platform. But the reason these X's are here is because of this. If you look at, hopefully I'm going to open the right file. Okay, so if I look at this, it represents a stage floor with 2 symbols on it, and these look exactly the same, right? These are both 4x8 somethings. But if I look at this from a different view, this is a 3D drawing, I start to see that, in fact, one of these is a hole in the floor, and the other one is a platform. 2 entirely different things. Hole in the floor, trapdoor or something, and platform. But from the top view, they look exactly the same. So we, years ago, developed the convention that a platform has an X drawn through it to indicate that there is something there, that it's not a hole. You don't frequently see the X shown on platforms unless it needs to be. So for instance, if you have a show that's only has platforms in it, there are no holes in the floor, you generally don't draw the X's through other platforms. It's really obvious what's going on. So that's why that you may not be used to seeing the X's through the platforms. When you see a platform layout or something where there is the possibility that there are holes or something, then the X's do come into play. So the standard symbol for a platform is the outline of the platform with an X through it. You should know that, but you should also be aware that it's not uncommon for people to draw platforms without the X when there's a case where there's no chance that there's going to be any confusion that rectangle is something other than a platform. But we're going to go ahead and draw them this traditional way with the X through them. And then a ramp is just a derivation of a platform where there's only 1 slash, and then it has 2 numbers instead of 1, because of course a ramp is lower on one end and higher at the other end, so that the numbers just represent the low and the high end, and then there's an arrow drawn to indicate ramp. And once again, often this line, the cross line, is eliminated, but the arrow line is usually still used. So we're going to draw the ramp and the platform. These are 4x8 standard platforms. So we're going to go back. Let's go back and find the right Vectorworks drawing now. Okay, there it is. So we're going to draw a 4x8 platform. So I'm going to double click on the rectangle tool, and we're going to do 8 feet. 8 feet by 4 feet. 4 feet. We're going to insert it by its upper left-hand corner, and we're going to put it right there. And then I'm either going to duplicate that and move it, or since there's only one more, I'm just going to do the same thing. I'm just going to repeat exactly what I just did. I'm going to click and put one right there. All right, so there's my platform and my ramp, and then I'm going to draw the stairs. The stairs are 1 foot wide and 3 feet. Well, technically they're 1 foot deep and 3 feet wide. proper stair terminology. So I'm going to double click on my rectangle tool. These are going to be 12 inches wide or deep and 3 feet, 36 inches tall. And I'm going to insert it this time by the center of its left, just because of where I'm going to put it. So the center left of the insertion points. Then I'm going to put it right here between the two platforms and right there. So there's the first step. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, there are 5 steps. So I can either do duplicate array, edit, duplicate array. I want to make 4 copies because I already have one. They're going 0x and they're going 12 inches y. So I can do that. Or I can just do my standard duplicate Command D and then move it, and then Command D 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 4 more times until I get that. All right, so the next thing I'm going to do is draw in these symbolic lines, and since all of these are not real things, the platform, this dark line or the medium line indicates the edge of an actual thing. This is the edge of the plywood or of the 2x4 or of the whatever. But the lines I'm about to draw don't represent actual things, they just represent symbolic things. So we're going to draw those with a thin line rather than a medium line. And since I'm going to be drawing a bunch of them, I'm going to go ahead and change now my default to the thin line 0.10 so that everything I draw from now on is going to be a thin line until I change it back. I don't have to do that. I could just draw them all as 0.25 lines and then go back later and change them, but it seems like it's easier to do it this way. So now I'm going to select my line tool and I'm going to interactively just draw an X here on the, that didn't work out very well, on the platform, and then I'm going to draw 1 slash on the ramp, and then I'm going to draw in my circles to indicate heights, and you'll notice that they are just slightly smaller than the steps. You don't ever want the circles to touch the steps, so I'm going to draw those in using the circle tool interactively, and I can click, and because I have snap turned on, it's only going to let me at this point draw a 3-inch circle or a 6-inch circle. As you remember, we set our snap grid to 3 inches, so it's not going to let me draw anything except for 3 and 6, 9, 12, whatever. So I can either turn snapping off, or I can introduce a new thing here, which is the interactive input of discrete numbers. So you'll notice that as I'm drawing the circle here, there's the readout that says 6-inch radius, 3-inch radius. If I hit, as I'm drawing here, if I hit tab, it will take me to these numbers, and I can actually type in my own numbers. So if I hit 5 and hit return and return again, it lets me, as I'm drawing, type in a number. So it's kind of a hybrid between doing the double click method where you type in what you want at the beginning and the interactive, I need to stop that, the interactive method is interactively drawing, but then hitting tab and it will take you to the first number there. And if you continue to hit tab, it will take you through the rest of the available options, and then it will cycle through again. And as soon as you get to one that you want, you can type in a number and then hit return twice, and it will complete that. So then I could duplicate that there. So there are my circles. I'm going to use the same circle. I'm going to duplicate and put it here for the platform, and then I'm going to duplicate again, and you'll notice that it moved way over here. And frequently when you duplicate something, you will think it has not worked or has disappeared, but it's because it's moved out of view. And that's because when I duplicated this and moved it to here, when it replicated that action, it did this the same. So from here to here is the same as from here to here. So that's why it moved all the way over here. So just bear in mind that if you duplicate something and it disappears, if you zoom out a little bit, it's usually there somewhere. So in the case of the ramp, I'm gonna, so I just duplicated and it disappeared. That's because it's over here, because I had moved it from here to here, and now I'm moving it from here to there. So I don't know why I duplicated that again. So I'm going to move this over and line it up. So I've lined up the center right of the circle with the center right of the rectangle, and over here I lined up the center left of the circle. I don't want these exactly touching the ramp because that's just not good drafting practice. I need to move them away, so I can either move them, modify move, like, I don't know, an inch, 1 inch, or I can use what's called the nudge command. If I hold down shift and use the arrow key, and I can just move it to the left like that. Either one in this particular case is fine because the 1 inch is not an important measurement. It's just a visual cue thing. So I can either really move it a precise distance, or I can use the nudge command. And then I'm going to draw in this line and turn on the arrow at the end in attributes. So then the last thing I need to do is type in the numbers, and these are just interactively, or not interactively, they're just text. There's nothing special about it. I'm going to use the text tool. I find it really hard to get it where it's supposed to go. Can try, but it's almost always off-centered. So I usually just draw it somewhere random and drag it into the center. So that's plus 48. This is going to be plus 6 inches and plus 18 inches. And then after I've typed those, I'm going to grab them by their center, and you'll notice the little red square turns on. I'm going to grab it by its center and move it to the center of the circle 18, and then these are going to be plus 6 inches, plus 12, plus 18, plus 24, and plus 30. And in case you're wondering, yes, there is a way to automate this. There's a stair tool that you can use in Vectorworks. It draws three-dimensional stairs, but you can set it up to show the 2D top view of them with the numbers and things in it. We'll be talking about that later. But just if you're just drawing stairs from scratch, there's no shortcut. You just have to type in the numbers. So then I'm going to group all these things together individually. So I'm going to select all of the stairs, and I'm going to Command G, and then I'm going to select select all of the platform and Command G, and select all of the ramp and Command G. And it seems like a good time to save. You'll notice I haven't done some of the labeling things. I'm going to go back and do those in the annotation of the viewport later, because best practice dictates that we don't do dimensions and notes and things on the actual drawing, with the exception sometimes of stairs and platforms and those kinds of heights things, because they're a slightly different animal, and it would be rare that you would want any drawing of the stairs without the stair height on it. So, and the same thing for a platform. All right, so there are our platform, ramp, and stairs. Next, we're going to work on our flats. We have two different types of flats. We have a Broadway flat and a Hollywood flat, or a TV flat. I'm assuming that most of you know the difference, but just in case you don't, the Hollywood flat or the TV flat are the flats that we typically build in the shop here and in most theater shops. They're the 3-inch thick, 1x3 on edge, hard covered with Luan flats. The Broadway flats are the traditional flats that are traditionally they're soft covered with fabric, and the 1x3 is on flat rather than on edge. Nowadays, even if you are building Broadway flat, typically they're not soft anymore. They still are covered with Luan. So the symbol for those is basically just the outline of the flat. So it's the if you were looking at the flat from the top, that's this rectangle. Or if you had the flat sitting on the floor and drew a line around it on the floor, this is what you would have. You would have just the shape of the flat. So we're going to draw these two, and I just want to say before we move ahead, just to be clear that all flats are not 4 feet wide. All flats are not necessarily 3 inches thick. All doors are not the same. So these are standard generic symbols that represent these items, but it doesn't mean that they're always going to look like this. The flat might be longer than this. It might be 5 feet wide 5 inches wide rather than 3 inches wide. The doors may be different widths, so don't don't get hung up on the sizes of these things. Just recognize symbolically what the symbols mean and how we're going to draw them, but don't be confused that that a flat always looks like this. A flat always looks similar to this, but it could have a different size. So both these flats are, as we're drawing them here, are 4 feet wide. The Broadway flat is 1 inch thick, and the Hollywood flat is 3 inches thick. So we're gonna go back to our drawing. Gonna double click here. 48 inches, 1 inch. I'm gonna continue inserting it by its center. I'm gonna click here. I'll line it up with the staircase, and I'm going to put it right in the center of between these two lines. So on this line here, and I'm going to notice something interesting. That's the wrong line weight, because I had previously set my default line thickness to 0.10 for the platforms and the stairs. I have not changed it back, so I'm going to go ahead and change it back to 0.25, and then I'm going to select this. And was it selected when I? That's interesting. Really? Huh, okay. So at any rate, so 0.25. Then I'm going to duplicate this and drag it down. Well, actually, before I do that, now I want this to be 3 inches wide rather than 1 inch. So I just duplicated it, and now in Object Info, I'm just going to type in a 3 and change the thickness of it. And I'm going to grab it by its center and line it up here and put it right there. So at any rate, so now we've drawn our Broadway flat and our Hollywood flat. We're going to add the dimensions later. We're going to use the Hollywood flat as the basis for drawing all the doors and windows. But I just want to reiterate something that to tack on to what I said before, that these are just symbolic. Something that people have been confused by in the past is that the gray things here are not part of the symbol. The symbol for an arch is the hole in the middle of the flat. But I can't draw a hole without having something to draw a hole in. So the symbol for the arch is just the dashed line and the hole. The gray things are not part of the symbol for the arch. They're just representing the flat that the arch is in. So later on, if you're drawing a long wall with an arch in it, you just draw the hole and the dashed line. You don't add the little gray things on either end. Some of you, that may sound, well, like duh, but for other people in the past, that has proved to be confusing from this drawing. So just to repeat myself for the third time, the gray thing represents the flat. The actual symbol for arch is this part of it. The symbol for the door is this part. The gray parts are not part of the symbol. They're just there to show you that the symbol has to be in something, or it doesn't. You can't have an archway unless you have a wall, because then you would just have a hole. And like I said, you can't have a hole without having something to have the hole in. So anyway, so what we're going to do here is we're going to start with the Hollywood flat and duplicate it and use it as the basis for the doors. But before we do that, I want to talk about I did not mean to close that. I want to talk about why these arches and doors look like they do. Some of you may know this, but for other people, this may be new information. So when we are looking at a flat or a wall that has a door or an arch or a window or anything in it, it looks like this. So here's our, hopefully you recognize this is the flat with a door in it. And if we looked at it just from the top view and drew what we saw, we wouldn't actually see the door opening. We might see the door, but we wouldn't see what we're used to seeing, because we are just looking at the top. And if we looked at the bottom, it would look right for a door, but wouldn't look right for a window, because we wouldn't see the hole for the window. So the convention has arisen that the way ground plans work is you imagine that about 4 feet up from the floor, you cut away the set, remove the top part, and then what you see from the top with that part removed is the symbol for the door or the window. So hopefully that makes sense. And so you can see this is the real thing. This is it with the top removed from above 4 feet, And then from the top, you can see that, if I can line this up properly, yeah, this just looks like a rectangle. But this shows us that there's an opening there. And then we generally go on to simplify in the ground plan that we don't show all of the way the flat's actually built. So we just turn the sides of the flat into just simple rectangles. And then we sort of flatten it all, and we eventually end up with this. And we add the door swing, which is what the arrow was called, to show the direction the door is opening, and also to show that if we kept drawing it, that this is space that can't be occupied by anything else. But so that's how we arrived with these symbols that we're about to draw, is by taking a wall, cutting the top of it off above 4 feet, drawing in imaginary dashed lines to represent openings and things, and then sort of simplifying from there. So that's what we are going to draw, if I can find where to put the drawing. All right, so first thing we're going to do is draw an arch, and we're going to decide just arbitrarily that all of these doors and windows are 2.5 feet wide. Doors tend to be somewhere between 2 feet and 3 feet wide in real life, depending on the sort of the use of the door. If you go home and look at the doors in your wherever you live, you'll probably find that the front door going to the house or the apartment or whatever is 3 feet wide. Inside the house, the doors between the bedrooms and other rooms may be somewhere between 2.5 or 2 feet 9, somewhere in that range. And it's the very smallest door you usually have is 24 inches, because you can't really get through a door that's any smaller than that. Sometimes closets or bathrooms will have 24-inch doors. But I'm going to pick a number right in the middle and just decide these doors are all 26 inches, or sorry, 2 feet 6 inches, or 30 inches wide. But just remember, it's common, but it's not like a standard. Like, all doors are not 30 inches wide. But okay, so I'm going to duplicate this. So I'm going to put this right, let's decide to put it right there. I think we may move all this around later. And so I'm going to draw a rectangle that represents the hole for the arch. So click here, and we're going to go 30 inches and 3 inches. 3 inches, okay. Click there. And I'm going to put it right there. Just because I'm used to doing that, that's the way I did it. It would be more efficient if I did this. If I inserted it by its center point and then clicked right there. So step 1. Step 2, you'll notice that the arch is drawn with a dashed line that is the thin line, because it's an imaginary line. So I'm going to change this from 0.25 to 0.10, and I'm going to change it from solid to line type, and it's going to be dashed. And if I look at this, that looks a little weird. That's because I have a dashed line on top of real line. So I'm going to need to fix that. So what I'm going to do is select both of these things by either dragging over them or clicking one and then clicking the other, and I'm going to modify clip surface. And look, that looks better, because what's happened here is the clip surface actually cuts this away from these. So it clears up the dashed line on top of a solid line problem. And then, in fact, I also want to make the dashed line box not solid. So that's what that looks like, which looks like this, which it's supposed to, so all's good. So now I'm going to group this, I'm going to select them both and Command G. And if we look at, and I think I'm going to save, because Vectorworks has been very strange to me today. If we look at the rest of the doors, you'll notice that they're all based on the arch. That's because, if you think about it, a door is basically just an arch with a door in it. So in order to create the other doors, we're going to take the arch, duplicate it, and then add the doors themselves to it. So the outswinging door and the in-swinging door are just your standard doors. Outswinging means it swings out from the room. In-swinging means it swings into the room. And the double swinging door is like a restaurant door, the ones that swing both ways, or a door in a comedy or a farce. They're lots of good stage business with actors on both sides, hitting each other with a swinging door. So first we're going to work on the outswinging door, and we will duplicate our arch, Command D. We're going to move it down, I think put it right along in here somewhere, And so here's our doorway, basically, is our arch. The next thing we need to do is draw the door itself. So we're going to use the rectangle tool, the interactive mode. I'm going to click here and then click there. Because snapping and other things are on, it's going to force me to go to the center of the opening, which is 1.5 inches. Doors are usually not 1.5 inches. They're usually 1.25 inches thick. So I'm going to do that, and you'll notice that that slightly changed the position of the door. The door fill should be the same as the other gray things that we've been drawing, so 50%. And then what I need to do is swing the door open. So this gives us an opportunity to talk about how to use the rotate tool. The rotate tool can sometimes be confusing for people to figure out how to use because it's a multi-click tool, but if you always think of anything that you're rotating like a door, then it will become easier. So the rotate tool is here. If you click on the rotate tool, you get this lovely lavender protractor. And the way the rotate tool works is this. You first click on the point of rotation, and then you click on the rotation handle, and then you drag in the direction of rotation. And if all of that sounds confusing, it is. But if you think of it this way, if you always think of the object that you're rotating, whatever the object is, as a door, you do this. The first click is where the hinge of the door or the object is. So you click there where the hinge would be, and then you click where the handle of the door would be, and then you drag in the way you want the door to open. So no matter what you're rotating, if you think of it as a door where you click first on the hinge, second on the handle, and then just click it to drag open, then that's the way the rotate tool works. I want this to be 45 degrees, so if I hold down Shift, it will, if you remember Shift, constrains things to normal angles, so I can constrain it to 45 degrees. Hold down Shift and click, and there we have our open door. Now what we need to do is draw our door swing, which is just an arc. So I'm going to use the arc tool, and in the first mode, in the radius mode, and the way the arc tool works as a refresher is you click once where the radius is, and then click again, and then drag. So I'm going to click once where the hinge is, once on the other side of the door right here, and then drag, and then click a third time. You'll notice it creates a solid pie wedge. I don't want it to be solid. I want it to have no fill. It's an imaginary line, so it should be 0.10, and then there needs to be an arrow, whoops, at the end of it. So there we have our out-swinging door. The one last sort of picky thing is that the imaginary line here should actually be above, on top of the door, because of course the door opening is above the door. So I need to take this and put it in front of this. Well, how do I do that? The way I do that is by modify send to front. Now you'll notice the dashed line is on top. What Vectorworks is that it uses a stacking metaphor, that whenever you draw an object, it assumes that the new object is stacked on top of the previous object. So if you want to have this object on top, or this any of the objects on top, you modify send to front, and it will send it to the front of the whole stack. If you can also, of course, send to back, or you can send up step by step. So instead of send to front, I can send forward, and it will send it in front of this one, but not in front of that one. So you have send to front, send to back, send forward, and send backwards or backward is how you can control the stacking order of things. So I'm going to select all of this and Command G to group it together. There's our out-swinging door, and if you look at the in-swinging door, it is exactly like the out-swinging door, except it's just flipped in the opposite direction. So this gives us a good chance to explore the rotate function. So I'm going to select my door, I'm going to Command D to duplicate it, and then I'm going to modify rotate, and I can type in, if I just click rotate here, I can type in any degree of rotation I want, but also at the bottom, modify rotate, we have rotate left, rotate right, flip horizontal, and flip vertical. And these are the four. You can type it in anything you want here, but these are the four that are used a lot. So the one we want is flip vertical, which does that. Flip horizontal, of course, flips it in the left and right. So vertical flips it top to bottom, flip horizontal flips it left and right. And rotate left and rotate right should, I hope, be self-explanatory. Modify, rotates, flip. So yeah, something like that, right? that's how we do that. We're going to select, we're going to grab this right here by the center of the left-hand part of the flat, and we're going to move it probably right along in there somewhere. I may change the spacing of these later once we draw the last one to make them fit on the page better, but for right now, that's where we're putting it. And then the final thing is the double swinging door, which of course is based on the single swinging doors. We just add another element, the imaginary other swing, because in a normal door we know it stops at the door jamb. In a double swinging door we just have to sort of show both extremes of the door. We show one as a real door and the other extreme as an imaginary door. So I'm going to duplicate this and go ahead and move it down here. Maybe line it up right there. So this is grouped. I can either modify, ungroup, and work on it, or I can double click on the group. Double click. This will take me inside the group. I know I'm inside the group because I have this melon colored border around my screen, and I can work on the object while inside the group, and then when I exit group it'll just revert back, or it'll take me back outside the group. So the first thing to know is that double swinging doors hinge strangely. Normal doors hinge on one side of the wall or the other. Double swinging doors hinge in the middle of the doorway. That's how they work. They're kind of really interesting hinges. If you have a chance, well, in the shop somewhere there's a box of double swinging hinges. I'm sure if you ask John or Mike where they are, they can tell you. And if you look at the way they operate, they're mechanically kind of cool. What they have to do in order to make the door swing both ways is more complicated than you would imagine. But at any rate, so for drafting purposes, we just draw it right in the center of the door opening. I'm going to duplicate it, Command D, modify, rotate, flip vertical to make the other door. I'm going to line it up like this, and then I'm going to make this not solid and a dashed line and a thin line. So there's the imaginary other side of the door. You'll notice that the door swing changes slightly when it turns into a double swinging door. It in effect renders the door slightly shorter. In order for the door to actually swing, there has to be more space, so the arrow doesn't line up with the door anymore. And the easiest way to solve this is just to draw a new arrow. So I'm going to go back to my arc tool, and this time I'm going to set the radius here. Once again at the hinge. The hinge is just in a different place. I'm going to drag over. I'm going to come over to the center of the flat and drag down and click, and then I can reselect it and do that. I could also have drawn that like this. Set the first point here and then the second point there, and then drag all the way around. Either one of those is acceptable. I'm going to set this to none, so to no fill. It should be its imaginary line, so 0.10, and then there should be arrows on both ends. And that is our double swinging door. And if I exit group, there we have it. It's interesting. There's a circle left over from something that we did before. I think just to lay the page out a little better, well, let's see. First, let's save. Then we're going to go back here and see that, well, I guess because of it really is sort of lined up. That door is sort of lined up with the top of the stairs. So you can move it down one, put that there. Then that means that this one can probably come down a little bit. This one can also come down. Spacing out doors on a drawing in ground plan can be a little strange because you have to take into account the door swing, and it gets a little funky. So once again, there's no, well, that didn't look good. There's no magic here. I'm just trying to make the drawing look good. So there we have our doors, and now's a good time to save. Okay, next up we're going to work on the windows. We have a double hung window and a casement window. And just in case you're not familiar with that terminology, this is a double hung window. This is what we, or sort of a standard window. It's called double hung window because there are two sashes and they raise and lower. Or usually frequently the bottom one is fixed and the top one moves, or sometimes they both move. But so this is what a double hung window looks like. And then this is a casement window. Casement windows open like doors, basically. They open out. So the first one we're going to work on is the casement window. And to open the... So the first one we're going to work on is the double hung window. The symbol for the double hung window looks a little bit like a door. So there's a light gray area here where the window is, but instead of being open like a door is, it's not dashed. It's a lighter gray, because if you think about the way a window works, it's not open all the way to the floor. There's a hole, but you can see the windowsill. So that's why it's not totally open like a door or an arch. And then this portion right here is the actual window itself. This represents one of the sashes. So you can see that this dark gray line represents the frame around the sash. So that's this part of the window. And then this line here represents the mullions or the muttons, which are these cross pieces. This one would have two gray boxes. This particular window is only drawn with one, so there would only be one upright, but hopefully you can see what the symbol means. So obviously we're going to start, and then the casement window, while we're here looking at it, is basically the same thing, only it's two pieces, and with the arrows that indicate, just like a door, that it swings open. So these pieces here, this one and this one, represent this frame. And you can see how if we cut a line across here, we would see this, and we would see this, and then we would see the one in the middle. And here is the one in the middle. So that's how these window symbols correspond to actual windows. I'm just going to sort of arbitrarily decide that the windows are 1 inch thick and that the outside frame is 1.5 inches wide and the inside frame is 1 inch wide. So we're going to go back to our drawing. We're going to duplicate our arch. Command D. We're going to drag it over here. It's like I don't have snapping on, so I'm going to turn snapping back on. I'm going to put it right there. And then I'm going to double click on it to edit it. I'm going to change this back to a solid with a 25% or maybe a 20% gray. I'm going to change this back to a solid line type. I'm going to send these two to the front. Modify send to front, so that the heavier line weight continues on all 4 sides of those. And then I'm going to draw the window itself. So we're going to do this. We're going to draw the rectangle here, and then we're going to, in the object info, we're going to change this to be 1 inch deep. And then I'm going to draw a rectangle here, and change that from 3 inches wide to 1.5. And of course it defaulted to 3 inches because that's what my snap grid is set to. So there's that. I'm going to duplicate that, Command D. I'm going to put it right there. I'm going to Command D again to duplicate it. And now this time you'll notice it landed right on top of the other one. If I move it, it will still be there. So because I duplicated it and then duplicated again the exact same thing, it just put it right on top of the other one. So I'm going to change this to 1 inch. It's a 1 inch square. That didn't work. Let's try that again. 1 inch. And place that. I'm going to grab it by its top center and line it up with the center there. So there and then I'm going to refer back to this. We're going to set to to 10% gray, so it's slightly lighter than the other. And there we have our window. So that should look like that. This line here, the line of the sill, different people draw it different ways, and evidently I draw it different ways too, because I drew this one originally. This could either be a medium line, a 0.25 line that's just like the rest of the window, which would be fine, or it can be a lighter line. It's sort of depending on whether you assume that this is an imaginary line or not, and it's not really, because it represents the window sill, but it also represents the top of the window, so it's two different things. So it could be either way. Either one is correct. I think this one is maybe a little bit clearer to understand what that is, that it's the window sill, than this one, but either way is fine. So there's our double hung window. Then we're going to do our casement window. So I'm going to duplicate the double hung window, and I'm going to move it down so it's in line here. I'm going to go into edit it, and I'm going to group this together, Command G. You might be tempted to just, because there are two of these, if you notice that there are two windows side by side that hinge out, you might be tempted to just do this, to take this and shrink it down like that. This sort of works, but the problem with that is when I reduce it, the whole piece, it also reduces the size of everything that's inside the piece. So these, now I'm going to double click here to get inside this group. These, which used to be 1.5 inches wide, are now only 3/4 of an inch wide. So I would have to adjust these and make them the right size again, because the window itself, the sash is smaller overall, doesn't mean that the individual pieces are necessarily going to be smaller. 1.5. And you notice when I did that, it moved. It stretched out to the right, so I've got to put it back where it was. And just so I can make sure I know where this one is, I'm going to move it out of the way. I'm going to change it back to 1, and then I'm going to put it right there in the center. Then I can exit group. I can duplicate Command D that, and put the two of them right there. Okay, so far so good. And now I'm going to use the arc tool, and I'm going to click here, and then click here, and I totally did that backwards, sorry. I'm going to click here, and I'm going to click there, and I'm going to pull like that. And I'm going to set this to not be solid with an arrow on the end, and then I can duplicate that and modify, rotate, flip horizontal, and grab it here and put it right there, and exit the group, and now we have our casement window, which should look like that. And it looks like that. A line weight problem I just discovered. These two should be 0.10. Alright, there we have that. Okay, so now we have our two windows. I'm going to close that. So back here. So the last three things we have are drapery. The traditional symbol for drapery with fullness is sort of half circles. Of course, the difference between drapery with fullness and drapery without fullness is drapery with fullness has pleats in it, like the main red curtain in a theater. Drapery without fullness are like legs, where it's just a flat piece of fabric that doesn't have any pleats. And then a traveler is sort of a combination. That's like a black traveler in the center of the stage that can open and close. So the dashed line represents the track, the center of the track, and then usually travelers are shown with the curtains stacked up on either end. And so we're going to start first by drawing the drapery with fullness. These are 3-inch half circles. So we're going to go back, and there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 of them. So we're going to go back here. There are a couple different ways of doing this. We can draw a circle and cut it in half. We can use the arc tool. I think I'm going to use the arc tool. So I'm going to start here, 3 inches. Alright, so there's my first half circle. And then I'm going to duplicate that, modify, rotate, flip vertical. And I'm going to line it up there. Then I'm going to select both of those and duplicate. and move it to there. So that's 2, 4, and then duplicate again, 6, 8, 10, 12. So that should be all 12 of them. So that's how that works. Simple enough. I'm going to add this together, or Command G to group it together, rather, and sort of line it up centered on the window. It's like I need to move it back one. Alright, so there's, maybe if it will look better if we put it right there. Well, actually it will look better if we put it right there. Okay, so there's that. So there's our drapery with fullness. Once again, just to go through that again, so we're using the arc tool. I'm going to zoom in a little bit. I'm going to click. I'm going to set it to 3 inches. Draw a half arc. Duplicate it. Modify. Rotate. Flip vertical. Move it out of the way. Use the cross cursor to move it to here, then select them both. You could at this point group it together. You don't necessarily have to, but I could group it together. And then Command D, duplicate, move it over to here, and then Command D again until we get 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12 of them. So that's how that works. All right, and then save. It seems like a good time to save. The drapery without fullness is going to introduce a new tool. This is just a wavy line. So we want to make a line that we have the ability to curve a little bit, and we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 sort of curves: a down curve, an up curve, a down curve, and an up curve, and then it's going to be this. It wants to be the same length as our drapery with fullness. So what we're going to do in order to create a line that we can curve is, rather than drawing a line, we are going to draw, if we draw just a line, it's going to be that long, then I don't have any way of, it's only got 2 points, I can't do anything with it. I can't make it wavy. So what I have to do is draw a line using the polygon tool, which seems a little counterintuitive, but so I'm going to use the polygon tool, and I'm using this other previously drawn piece as a reference so I know where to put my points, but I could just do this freehand. But so I'm going to click here, then I'm going to click here, and then here. I'm going every 2, 1, 2, or every 3 rather, here, and then when I'm done I'm going to double click. So this looks like just a line, right? Only now you'll notice it's got 3 points. And if I click here, this is the reshape tool. Suddenly we start to see something new. We'll notice it brings up a bunch of points. And what happens here is this is the first point that I made, and this is the center that the program automatically generated between well, actually this was the first point, and then this was the second click, then the center, and then this is the third click I made, and then the center, and then the fourth click that I made, and then where I ended, and then the program has automatically generated a center point between each of them. So now I can take the reshape tool, I can use the tool bar here and tell it that I want to add a curve. So I don't want to add a corner, I want to add one of these curves. And I generally probably want to use the Bezier control mode. Bezier is just a mathematical way of drawing a curve. So I'm going to select Bezier. So I'm going to add Bezier. I'm going to click, and you notice my cursor turns to this very kind of weird arrow with 2 little blue boxes on it. I'm going to click and drag up, and then click again. Then here I'm going to click and drag down. And because I have snapping turned on, it's going to constrain it to sort of be the same in each direction. So click and drag up, and click and drag down, and there we have it. And then I'm going to set it to not be solid, and then to sort of finish it off, there's a little line on either end of it. So I'm going to draw a 3-inch long line. And I'm going to use polar this time, so I'm going to put it in polar mode. And I want the line to be 3 inches long, and I want the angle to be 90. And then I want to insert it by its center point. I'm going to click OK, and I'm going to click there, and then I'm going to set that line to be a smaller line, a 0.10. Then I'm going to duplicate that line. I'm going to grab it by its center. I'm going to bring it over here and put it right there. And then I'm going to select all of that and group it together. And there we have our curtain without fullness. And then I want to line it up with the other curtain so that it's there. And then finally, the last thing and save. Saving is very important. Oops, I'm in the wrong program. Now we're going to save, file, save. Okay, the last thing we want to draw is the traveler, which looks really complicated, but in fact, we're going to use the drapery with fullness, and it's going to be really easy to draw the traveler. So the traveler line, the traveler track itself is just a dashed line that's going to be the same length as our other curtains. So we're going to draw a line here to there. We're going to make that a 0.10 line, and it's going to be a line type of dashed. So far so good. Then what we're going to do is come up here and duplicate, Command D, our drapery with fullness, and line it up right there. We're going to set this to not be solid. You'll notice that it, even though it's solid, the dashed line still shows through, and that's because of the stacking order, because we drew this first and then drew the dashed line. The dashed line is on top, so even though the curves here are solid, they don't block the dashed line, but just for good practice, I'm going to set the curves to have none. And then here's the trick. I'm going to grab this, and then I'm going to make sure I have my double-ended cursor. You see the difference. Now I've got double-ended cursor. It does not work if you have this cursor. It does not work with this cursor. You must have this cursor, the double-ended cursor. I'm going to click and drag back to do that. And this looks slightly different than this, but actually they've made an improvement in the program since this one was drawn. This is what it actually should look like. This is what it was sort of look like, because the curves didn't work right earlier, but now they've improved it. So it looks like I'm actually going to probably go to there, and then I can duplicate that and bring it over and put it right there. And now I have my and depending on how you feel about this isn't symmetrical. It doesn't. Sometimes in real life they are, and sometimes they aren't. Actually, in real life, usually this is the way it would open. That it would, one of these would overlap the other. But to me, this looks a little strange. So I'm gonna rotate, flip vertical to make these symmetrical in the drawing, just because I think it looks better. But I'm gonna grab this and select them both and group, and then that should be our entire drawing. So File, Save. So far so good. So now what we're going to do is viewport this out to a sheet layer. So I'm going to File. No, I'm going here. I want a new sheet layer. Sorry, my screen is compressed because I'm on a small screen here. I want a new sheet layer. I'm going to call this 1. And we can call it symbols. All right, so there we have that. It's going to automatically set up in 11 by 17 because that's the last setting that we used for the last thing we set up, which was this page. So then I'm going to viewport this. So View, Create Viewport. I didn't have to draw the rectangle around it the way that I did in the last project because I'm selecting everything, so I don't have to draw the rectangle. I tell it what layer to put it on. I only have one choice. All the other settings I'm going to leave the same. I'm going to click OK, and so now here it is on our page, and I'm going to grab it and move it over a little bit. Okay, so now we have the viewport there, and then the next thing we're going to do is draw a border and a title block in. But I can copy those. I've already drawn those once. We drew them last week, so I'm going to go find that file, open it up, and copy them and paste them in to this file. But first I'm going to save. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is find last week's drawing. Oh, look, there it is. And I'm going to go to the sheet layer, and I'm just going to select the border and the title block and copy them, edit, copy, and I'm going to paste them into this document, edit, paste, But and you see they just sort of go randomly in. Here's the interesting trick. If I do edit, paste in place, assuming that that I have the same size drawing both times, it will paste it into the new drawing in the same place that it was in the old drawing. So that's kind of a neat trick. So then I'm going to want to double click on my title block and go in and change project 2. I should change the date. So set all this stuff up so that it matches the drawing that we're working on. So there we have the almost finished project 2. The last thing we need to do is to go back to our, I'm going to go ahead and close this. Yes, save. Go back to our example, and we need to put in all of the missing text and dimensions. So I'm going to start with the dimensions, and there really are only 2 dimensions. There's just the 2 flats that are dimensioned. So I'm going to double click on the window so that I can get into the annotations. I'm going to click OK. I'm going to zoom in here. I'm going to choose my constrained tool. Click, click, drag, click, and click, click. I just want to line these up, so I'm going to do that and click. The 1 is a little bit of a special case because it doesn't fit properly inside the lines. So if you want to fix that, if you click on it, then right here you'll get a little control plus, and you can move the text outside of the line, but that's not absolutely necessary. So the next thing we want to do, and I'm going to save. The next thing we want to do is just type in all these labels. So extra thick line 1.0. So I'm just going to over here, extra thick line 1.0. Okay. And we're going to make sure it's lined up there, and then so I'm going to click here, I'm going to line up there. You see it turns red, it gets this little red. I'm going to drag over here, and I'm going to do that. Now, in this document, everything is black. Setting the dimensions as blue was sort of a new thing that I've started doing since I created this document. So if you want it to continue to have everything blue to match the text here, what you can do is before you do that, make sure that here you're in the dimension class, so that now everything I'm creating is going to be, because everything before the class type, well, you can't, but everything, the class was none, because we only have 2 classes, none in dimension. But if I'm in the dimension class, because in our stationery last week we set the dimension class to automatically create anything in the dimension class as blue, if I go ahead and just put myself in the dimension class, then when I type notes, they will be blue as well. So extra thick line 1.0. Move it out of the way. I'm going to grab it by its center. I'm going to hover over this line so that it will line it up, the red line there, and then I'm going to let go. Then I'm going to duplicate that. I'm going to grab this by its center. I'm going to align it here, and then I'm also going to up here, and you'll notice that if you hover over both of them long enough, it'll give you 2 different lines so that it will let you line this up with this and also with this. And then I can duplicate again 7 more times to line all my text up, and then go ahead and just go in and double click and change the text so that it, so I guess I should have done that first. That's disappointing. I was hoping it was going to leave it lined up. It didn't, but I can still get back, and so I'm waiting for this to turn red, and then when I drag it back there, that's going to be like that. So you should just put in the rest and save. Don't forget to save. Put in the rest of the text, exit viewport annotation, save your file, and it should look like this when you're done with all of these annotations title block filled out, CAD Project 2, your name. It should be called lines and symbols. It should have the right date on it. And save it as a Vectorworks file and turn it in of course,